Morning and welcome to the Delta Stewardship Council meeting. It is 9:34 on Thursday, May 22nd, 2025. We're here at the California Natural Resources Building in Sacramento, California, and my name is Julie Lee, and I'm chair of the Delta Stewardship Council. I'm going to have Emma explain now how the public can participate in this meeting. Emma?
If any member of the public is interested in providing public comment on any agenda item during today's meeting, please send an email blue card to engage@deltacouncil.ca.gov as seen on the screen. Be sure to note your name and the agenda item that you wish to speak on. When called, the clerk will unmute you.
Thanks, Emma. In accordance with our Bagley-Keene requirements, we'll now conduct a roll call of council members to establish a quorum. Emma, can you lead us in the roll call?
Yes, Madam Chair. I'm going to note that Councilmember Burgess and Councilmember Hueso are absent, but will join us later. We'll make an announcement when they join.
Thank you.
Councilmember Damrell.
Here.
Councilmember Moranian.
Here.
Councilmember Miller. Councilmember Zingali.
Here.
Chair Lee.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you. I'll wait a second. We have Member Hueso joining us. We hear traffic's terrible this morning, so we'll just make a note that Member Hueso is now here. Our next agenda item is public comment. This item is for the public to comment on any topic not on the council's agenda. Any comments on items on the agenda will be taken during that item. Emma, do we have any public comments for items not on today's agenda?
We have a request to comment from Deirdre Desjardins.
Okay.
You should be able to speak now.
Yes, good morning, council members and Chair Lee. I wanted to speak to you about, ask you to allow public comment on the consent agenda at this meeting. And the reason is that the Bagley-Keene Open Meeting Act mandates that state bodies provide public comment on opportunities on each agenda item. And this is a pretty comprehensive obligation that encompasses all matters scheduled for consideration, including those grouped on consent agendas.
Absolutely. We totally plan to, and we always do provide public comment on the agenda items, including the consent calendar, and we're going to do that this time as well. In addition, we're also going to break out the consent items so that we only have on consent the first item, which is going to be item A, the adoption of the 2025 meeting summary. And then we're going to go on to a separate item 4B, and we'll also provide separate public comment for that item. So rest assured, we are going to give plenty of opportunity for public comment on that item and also a bit more of an explainer. Okay?
Thank you very much.
Yes, ma'am. Right. Do we have any other public comments, Emma?
No, Madam Chair, we do not.
All right.
And none in Eureka either.
Thank you, Daniel. All right. Our next item is the consent calendar. So as I was explaining, originally our plan was to have 2 items on the consent calendar. We're going to change that a little bit so that we can give more of an explainer on item B, which is the consideration and possible adoption of the regulations relating to the Delta Stewardship Council's meeting procedures. So what I'm going to do is ask for a motion for consent on the adoption of the April 24th, 2025 meeting summary first.
So moved.
Good.
Okay, moved by Vice Chair Miller, seconded by Member Moranian. And before we take a vote, I will ask if there are any public comments on that consent item.
I see Deirdre Desjardins has their hand raised. You may unmute now.
Sorry, that was a residual hand.
Thank you. Okay, any other public comment on the consent item A?
No, no further.
Okay, and nothing for Daniel, he said.
Nope.
So we shall proceed with the roll call vote. Emma?
Councilmember Damrell. Councilmember Damrell? Damrell, aye. Councilmember Hueso? Hueso, aye. Councilmember Maranian?
Aye.
Maranian, aye. Councilmember Miller?
Aye.
Miller, aye. Councilmember Zingali?
Aye.
Zingali, aye. Chair Lee?
Aye.
Lee, aye. The motion passes.
Thank you. And now we're going to go on to item 4B, which is consideration and possible adoption of regulations relating to the Delta Stewardship Council's meeting procedures, Resolution 2025-06. And we're inviting our comms director, Abbott Dutton, up to talk to us about that.
Good morning. This works. Good morning, Chair Lee. Good morning, council members and everyone watching online. My name is Abbott Dutton. I am the Deputy Executive Officer for External Affairs and Communications at the Delta Stewardship Council. It's a pleasure to be here this morning to present to you consideration and adoption, possible adoption for regulations relating to the Delta Stewardship Council's meeting procedures. I have a slideshow, if you could bring it up, please. Thank you. Next slide, please. Okay, let's begin with the purpose of this. The Delta Stewardship Council is considering adopting proposed regulations to improve the conduct of its meetings, enhance public transparency, and increase efficiency. These changes will be added to the California Code of Regulations, Title 23, Chapter 1, Article 2. Next slide. This matters because public participation is essential to the council's mission. The council's work involves diverse stakeholders, including Delta residents, water users, conservation groups, scientists, and government agencies. The proposed regulations align with the Delta Reform Act and the Bagley-Keene Open Meeting Act, ensuring equitable access and transparency. Next slide. The proposed regulations are to sections 5000.10 through 5000.17. These new sections outline meeting procedures, the roles of the chair and vice chair, public comment procedures, and record-keeping requirements. It's important to note that council meetings are subject to the Bagley-Keene Open Meeting Act. Next slide, please. Some key highlights of the proposed regulations are as follows. The proposed regulations would codify the ability of the council to meet as a committee in the absence of a quorum and bring recommendations to the full council at a later date. The election term limits, duties, and roles of the chair and vice chair, that a majority vote can overrule a decision of the chair, current public comment procedures and opportunities, notably allowing the chair to set and enforce reasonable time limits for public comments, the duties and role of the chief counsel as a parliamentarian, and the duties and role of the clerk, as well as the record keeping for closed sessions. And they would also codify the meeting minutes, transcripts, and resolutions as original evidence of council actions. Next slide, please. I'd also like to point out the objectives and benefits, which are to improve meeting efficiency and transparency and align practices with legal requirements. Next slide, please. And just to outline the rulemaking process and the steps that have been taken, a public comment period ran from March 1st to April 15th, 2025. The information was posted on our website and emailed to members of the public who subscribed to receive our announcements. No comments or hearing requests were received during the 45-day public comment period. And if adopted, final regulations are expected to take effect on October 1st, 2025, pending council approval and the review and approval timelines of the Department of Finance and the Office of Administrative Law, OAL. Next slide. Which leads to the requested action. Today, council staff recommends adopting Resolution 2025-06 to approve the proposed regulations and submit them for the final review. Next slide, please. Thank you for your time and attention. As always, you can find out information about public participation and more on our website at deltacouncil.ca.gov. You can also follow us on our social media platforms listed on the right of the screen. And if you'd like to receive our email announcements that announce all of our meetings, all of the actions that we're taking, you can subscribe to our listserv email announcement by scanning the QR code on the left. That's it for me. I'd also like to bring into the conversation Beck Barger. Beck Barger is joining us remotely. You're familiar with Beck. She is our Office of Public Participation Manager. She's usually on the desk over there with her staff, Emma and Eric, but today she's joining us remotely. And Beck worked on this. She wrote the regulation with the regulation unit, and she worked very hard on this. And she's also available for any questions about next steps, as she will be doing that part as well if it is approved here today. So thank you. If you have any questions, I'm here to answer them too.
Thanks, Abbott.
Mm-hmm.
Does anyone have any questions about our regulations for either Abbott or Beck? Yes, Diane.
Good morning. I
Morning.
do want to apologize to staff, to my colleagues, and to the public for being late. I always try to be early, and I respect your time. The reason, I think that giving people reasonable expectations of how they can participate in a meeting is always a good thing. I think when there's changes, people may be resistant and, uncomfortable. But I do believe from leadership and staff that there's no intention to try to hold people back from participating. It's just a way of creating reasonable expectations.
Yeah, thanks for that, Diane. And we did note that there was terrible traffic out this morning, so you're excused. Yeah, no worries. Don't worry. It was just crazy out there this morning. Yeah, and I think it's important to note that some of us weren't here in 2018, but the council did adopt or voted on their procedures, and this is just us putting those procedures into regulation. So these are the same rules that we've been working under for the last 7 years, I would say. I just think that that's important to note, and that we're also following along with language that is used by other boards and councils like the State Water Board and the California Energy Commission, which have the same stipulations as we put in our regulations.
We have Zingali on.
Yes, Dan, please go ahead. Dan Zingali.
Hi, thank you. Isn't it also true that you as chair or whoever the chair is also has the ability to set and enforce reasonable time limits on the rest of us, on council members or people speaking before? I mean, I'm just trying to envision a situation where we get in a time crunch with a lot of folks interested in sharing. It wouldn't necessarily mean singling out the public for limitations, but that could go all around, couldn't it?
Yeah, I'm going to let Jorge chime in. But
Sure.
yeah.
So the chair is responsible for the conduct of the meeting. She can suggest like a time frame, but in general, it's the chair who kind of manages the time for our meetings. So of course, the council itself, they can choose to go other ways if they were to vote and go another direction.
Yeah, I think the important thing to note is that our regulations aren't going to exceed anything that's in Bagley-Keene. Bagley-Keene will always be the head law on that, regardless of what our regs say.
Yes, that's true. Like there's nothing our regulations cannot trump Bagley-Keene.
Right.
We're always under the obligation to comply with Bagley-Keene, and it's my duty to make sure that this body does so.
Correct. Yeah.
Through the chair, I'm on a lot of committees, boards and commissions and ... And I've never heard that a chair or president can tell another colleague that they have limits on how they can speak or how long they can speak.
This regulation doesn't address that. It would only address public comment.
Yeah, because we need to be able to ask questions and
I agree.
speak and all of that. So,
Yes.
okay.
Yes.
Well, let me just say I'm volunteering to limit my comments if we're actually in a situation where we have to limit the public. I'd like to volunteer to actually follow the similar rule. So I'll just speak for myself on that.
Thanks, Member Zingali. And I mean, I think that we set an amount of time for each agenda item. And so in a way, we're asking people to comply with that, realizing that on our agenda, we need to respect people's time and the expectation of when they're going to come and speak before us. So if we all stick to reasonable amount of time for comments, I think we can do that without anyone having to take a hook and drag them off. All right, any other comments about this item? No, all right. Emma, I'll ask if there's any public comment. Well, first, I think what I'll do is ask for the motion and then I'll take a public comment. So I think that I would entertain a motion to adopt Resolution 2025-06, authorizing council staff to submit the final rulemaking package to OAL.
I'll move
approval?
approval, but I'm sorry, is there no public comment?
I'm going to go to public
Oh,
comment
I
after the
apologize.
motion.
I'm so
That's
sorry.
okay. All right,
So
so
we're going to go to public first and then.
I'm going to ask for the motion first.
Approval.
Okay, Vice Chair Miller moves approval.
Second.
Member Bronian seconds, and now I'll go to public comment.
I also wanted to note we received a written letter on this item. It's available in your packets for members in the room. If you're interested, it is in the public comment binder in the back.
Thanks, Emma. Thank you for that.
And we do have an online public comment from Deirdre Desjardins. You should be able to speak now.
Thank you, Chair Lee and members of the council. I did want to say the concern that we have is with section 5000.15C, which allows the chair or other presiding member of the council to limit or preclude oral comments. On its face, this would empower the chair to entirely shut down public testimony on an item under the subjective justification of keeping order. This regulation appears to directly conflict with section 11125.7A of the Bagley-Keene Open Meeting Act, which mandates an opportunity for the public to address each agenda item. The wholesale preclusion of public comment on a controversial agenda item would violate the Act's core requirement, even if done in the name of efficiency or order. Reasonable time, place, and manner constraints, like per speaker time limits or rules against disruptive behavior, are one thing, but a blanket ban on comment would cross a line. Bagley-Keene already provides a mechanism to address actual disruptions of order. If a meeting is willfully interrupted such that it is unfeasible to continue, the body may clear the room of those causing the disturbance and continue. That narrow remedy for disorder does not authorize a state body to dispense with public input entirely, but rather to remove disruptors and then continue business with public comment from those not responsible for the disturbance. By contrast, section 5000.15C, as drafted, could be read to let the chair prevent any comment on an item even absent a clear disruption, a power inconsistent with the letter and spirit of Bagley-Keene. The council's claimed authority for section 5000.15C is also sketchy. The initial statement of rules for the reasons for the rules cites Bagley-Keene section 1125.7 and Robert's rules as support for granting the chair this power. However, section 1125.7 only authorizes time limitations and similar regulations to facilitate public input. It does not sanction a rule that public comment can be entirely precluded at the chair's discretion, nor do Robert's rules of order override a statutory right of the public to be heard. The council's enabling law, Delta Reform Act, gives it authority to adopt necessary procedures, but explicitly not in conflict with other state laws. In short, Bagley-Keene's public comment mandate prevails over any internally adopted rule. And I think you have just acknowledged this, and I hope it will be considered as the way that you interpret these regulations. I do not know how they would be interpreted by future chairs. Thank you. And these are the reasons that I object. to this package of regulations. We did not discover it because the notice circulating the regulations stated that they were consistent with Bagley-Keene, and I saw it and did not go look at them close. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Emma, are there any other comments?
There are not, Madam Chair.
All right. So we have a motion, so let's proceed with the roll.
Through the chair, I think Mr. Aguilar had some comments.
Sure, I was just going to say that that the regulation can never trump or conflict with state law. So this body will always follow state law and be consistent with state law. And it would never be in a position to ban public comment on an agenda item, you know, because it can't do so. So so far as it talks about precluding, it would have to be activities. Sorry, it could only address comments that, you know, in a manner that it's allowed to under the law. So just wanted to be clear.
Thank you. And we appreciate the opportunity to get to explain this publicly and state what our intention is with it and that we do intend to follow Bagley-Keene. So Daniel, is your hand raised?
It is, yeah, I just wanted to follow up with Jorge on that. So is from your perspective, Jorge, does the word preclude belong in these
Well,
rules?
the word preclude, so the Bagley-Keene allows public comment on any agenda item, for example. So somebody couldn't come up and start talking about something outside the council's jurisdiction or that's not on the actual agenda. You don't have that right currently. The public does have a right to speak to the agenda item, specifically what Government Code 11125.7 says. So the only thing that the chair would be able to do under the regulation is act in accordance with Bagley-Keene.
And there is also typically a time in the agenda that allows for public comments for items that are not on the agenda for that particular.
Correct. And that's actually something that this council doesn't have to, but it does provide a general public comment period. And but it still would have to be within the jurisdiction. Like, you know, there's things that are just, this body just does not, you know, have jurisdiction.
Got it. Understood.
And does that language preclude, is that consistent, Jorge, Beck, with other boards' rules in this area?
Yes, in fact, we modeled it verbatim after the Water Board and the California Energy Commissions.
Thanks.
All right. Are we ready to proceed with the vote? Seeing no other comments or commentary, Emma, I'll ask for a roll call vote on this item, please.
Councilmember Burgess.
Aye.
Burgess, aye. Councilmember Damrell. Damrell, aye. Councilmember Hueso. Hueso, aye. Councilmember Maranian.
Aye.
Maranian, aye. Councilmember Miller.
Aye.
Miller, aye. Councilmember Zingali.
Aye.
Zingali, aye. Chair Lee.
Aye.
Lee, aye. The motion passes.
All right. Thank you. And thanks to staff that took all the time to get this through, and appreciate that this is now part of our regulations and they will take effect October 1st. Is that my understanding, Babbitt? Pending OAL approval.
And yes, pending OAL approval.
Thank you,
in
ma'am.
October. Thank you.
All right. Our next agenda item is the chair's report, and I will make it quick. We met May 9th, Vice Chair Miller and myself with Delta County Coalition members Pat Humes, Sunny Dollywall, and Oscar Villegas. We had a great meeting. It was very nice to connect with them and hear about their concerns about things going on in the Delta, and give them a little bit of a preview of, or not preview, but an explainer on our appeals process and kind of how that all works and our timelines and different things like that. So we had a really good conversation with them. Do you want to, anything you want to add about that?
No, I just also just want to express gratitude for the collaboration and the opportunity to discuss, and especially with your colleagues. It was really a pleasure, and I think we have not only some continued work, but also some fun opportunities to hopefully continue to explore the Delta and learn together, and just really be a part of the Delta as place. And I did go to Locke and got to experience the festival, which was really fun. So it just was, I think, the beginning of hopefully a really great dialogue. So, and thank you. I know you helped set that up. So really appreciate it, Councilmember Burgess.
Thanks, Gail. And then last week I was at the Aqua Conference in Monterey with Jessica, And Henry got to meet a lot of folks and sit in on some sessions and learn a lot about water in California. So it's very good. Jessica's probably going to talk a little bit more about that when she gets to her executive officer report. So that's it for me on the chair's reports. Any other members have anything that they want to add or chime in with? Daniel, your hand is still up, so I'm going to assume that that's old. Okay, but you can
You're
talk. if you
correct.
want. Okay. All right. So I'll ask if there are any public comments on this item.
No, Madam Chair, there are not.
All right. And none from Daniel's area?
Correct.
All right. We'll go on to our next agenda item, the Executive Officer's Report. And I'll turn it over to Executive Officer Jessica Pearson.
Thank you. Good morning. Welcome back to Natural Resources Agency headquarters. We enjoyed our time last month at the Clarksburg Schoolhouse and look forward to visiting again in the future. We're proud to have hosted and attended, I think, at least 3, maybe 4 events there in the last 2 months. And that location is really a great addition to the community and to the region. Overall, we've had really an active month out in the community. I traveled to the Gene Harvey Community Center in Walnut Grove to once again kick off the 3-day Bay Delta tour, which is hosted by the Water Education Foundation. If you have not been on this tour, I would say it's a must-do for kind of a deep dive into learning about the Delta in a really short period of time. In fact, we try to send new staff and fellows when possible as part of their onboarding. I was also honored to highlight the role of the Council and the Delta Science Program in pioneering implementation of open science principles. And this was part of a panel entitled Building Trust in Decision-Making Through Shared Science at this year's Spring Aqua Conference, the Association of California Water Agencies. For the panel, I sat alongside Chair Joaquin Esquivel of the State Water Board, Delta Water Master Jay Ziegler, and DWR lead scientist Louise Conrad. The panel was moderated by the CEO of the California Water Data Consortium, Robin Grimm, and it was a pretty well-attended event, and we got some positive feedback from those who were there in the room. At the beginning of this month, I also welcomed a new group of Delta Science Fellows, which you heard about at our March meeting. We held an early career leadership workshop actually here in this room. We host this workshop in collaboration with California Sea Grant, and it's intended to train the fellows on their science communication skills and practices so that they become better at explaining and sharing the why it matters aspect of their research. They also get the opportunity to interact with our Delta Science Program staff, with Sea Grant staff, and really to start to build a network among their fellows. This group is the 14th cohort of fellows that we have funded or our predecessor agency funded since 2003. In that time, there's been 115 fellowships awarded, and many of these fellowship recipients are still working in the Delta community, I'll call it, science and management capacities, including even on our own staff. So we love to see that. We've had no new covered actions filed since our last meeting. The West False River Drought Salinity Barrier public review and appeal period is live now and ends on May 28th. For more about covered actions, you can go on our website under Delta Plan and then drop down to covered actions. We did send a couple comment letters, one to the Central Valley Flood Protection Board on May 15th, and this is about their YOLO Bypass Cash Slough Partnership Draft Master Plan. This is a document that is developed by DWR in coordination with the Flood Board, and it's intended to provide a framework for the implementation of projects in the YOLO Bypass Cash Slough region. So you can find that letter in your packet. We're essentially offering to engage in early consultation on that project. And then on May 19th, we sent a letter to the San Joaquin Council of Governments on their notice of preparation for an EIR for their regional transportation plan or sustainable community strategy. We summarize our Delta Reform Act. We summarize Delta Reform Act requirements and Delta Plan policies, and we also invite them to engage with us in conversation. I'd like to welcome, and he is here in the room, Jaden Jekyll. He is a new student, Jaden, if you wave, from the University of San Francisco. He's joining us this summer. He's majoring in politics with minors in legal studies and environmental studies. He brings experience from the San Francisco Public Defender's Office with a background that includes journalism and community organizing. So we look forward to working with Jaden this summer. We had 2 topics that earned top attention on the council's social media last month. We've continued to grow our following, especially on LinkedIn and Instagram. Our most notable posts on those platforms are announcing our 2025 Delta Science Fellowship recipients and promoting our final Delta Science Research Awards seminar. Several of our web pages have also been updated for the public's information with new info and dates, including the environmental justice, science communication, synthesis, research funding, and fellowship web pages. So please check those out if you're interested. And now I am going to invite our executive fellow, Audrey Cho, up for a legislative update. She is standing in, many of you remember that Brandon Chapin has moved on to another job. And so Audrey is doing a really good job keeping us informed and tracking what's happening in the legislature. Welcome, Audrey.
Thank you. Good morning, Chair and council members. I do have some slides for you today. Hopefully we can get those up. But in the meantime, since Brandon's departure last month, I've been tracking not only our Senate Bill 650, but also keeping tabs on other legislative and policy related matters that I'd like to share with you today. Next slide, please. Great. So as we've discussed previously, Senate Bill 650 is currently in the legislative process. I'm really thrilled and excited to announce that it is advanced out of the Senate side of things on May 15th and has now moved over to the Assembly desk, awaiting further committee assignments. Just as a quick reminder, the bill has 3 primary provisions. The first is that it would establish a 90-day statute of limitations for legal challenges to adoption or amendment of the Delta Plan or its appeals procedures or council determinations of an appeal. Second, it clarifies the definition of a person within the Delta Reform Act to explicitly include state and local public agencies. And third is that it establishes a severability clause to ensure that the Delta Plan remains in effect even if a portion of it is invalidated by a court. Next slide, please. So as many of you may know, on May 14th, the governor released his May budget revision. Within this, there were a series of trailer bills also released, one of which addresses changes to streamlined administrative procedures for the Delta Conveyance Project. There were many provisions within this trailer bill, and I'll highlight 2 of them for you all today. The first provision halts stays or injunctions that would challenge conveyance-related permitting or infrastructure unless there's an imminent threat to public health or safety, as found within 60 days by a court. And the second provision states that actions against the conveyance project shall be resolved within 270 days to the extent possible. I do want to say that within our understanding, the provisions within this trailer bill do not have a direct impact on the council's role or its process as a quasi-judiciary body. So if you have any questions, happy to take those or field them amongst myself and JP.
Any questions for Audrey? Thank you, Audrey. Oh, sorry, Diane.
I'm just going to say, I'm hearing you're doing a really good job coming up from behind. So thank you for what you're doing, Audrey.
Thank you.
Okay. Yes, we are grateful for her assistance. Very capable. And I did mean to mention that for Jaden Jekyll, that you are a McCarthy Fellow, right? That's the placement that you have with the council. And he learned about the council from Ruby Khalil, who was previously a McCarthy Fellow and apparently had such a good experience here that she helped recruit him. So we're grateful for that. Okay, so no legal report, correct, Jorge? No legal. Okay, so up next, we're going to hear from our Delta lead scientist, Dr. Lisa Marie Wyndham Myers, with her report. Then we're going to hear updates from Dr. Inga Werner and Dr. Bob Nyman, who are here in person on the recent activities of the Delta Independent Science Board. And then council staff are going to talk about how recent Delta levy investments have had an effect on risk reduction on the ground in the Delta, building on last month's 2024 Delta levy investment strategy report that you got from the Department of Water Resources. And that concludes my report.
Thanks, Jessica. Any members have any other questions for Jessica on any of her updates? All right, Emma, is there any public comment on this item?
No, Madam Chair, there is not.
So we will move on to our lead scientist report, and I'll introduce Dr. Lisa Marie Wyndham-Myers.
Great, thank you, Chair Lee. I have a graphic for this paper that I'm going to highlight today, which is, now that I hear about the terrible traffic, will be particularly of interest to those of you on the road. So the past couple of articles that I've highlighted have been about water tracking and then food for the fish food web, the carbon in the system and extreme events. This one gets to the human impacts on water quality, and particularly thinking about the sources of water in the water that's sloshing around in the Delta. If you think back to that graphic of the water cycle, the big water cycle, how water is moving through the system, humans are having a much larger impact. And depending on the season, a large fraction of the water coming through the Delta has interacted with land surfaces. So through stormwater runoff, through agricultural drainage, through wastewater, the importance of wastewater in our system. So wastewater comes all year, stormwater comes mostly in the winter, and then of course, agricultural drainage is mostly in the summer. So there's these periods of time and places where it plays a large role in the water channels and in the overall system. So there's a lot of contaminants in these systems. We know that just because the virtue of the water interacting with the surface. And then most contaminants in this cocktail are basically innocent until proven guilty. It takes a long time to figure out what chemicals they are and what effect they have. And one of the hot new ones, a contaminant of emerging concern, is PPDQ, which is a byproduct of tire wear. And I just learned at this microplastic symposium that if you just look at particles of tires in our watershed, at least 43,000 tires are making their way through the Delta every year. So there's just a lot of tire residue. And so the toxicity becomes a particularly interesting question. So this particular, and I will say that the Independent Science Board members that are here today both have a connection with these toxicity issues for aquatic life. And particularly for coho salmon, which actually turns out to be so sensitive that nobody really knows why it versus the other fish is more sensitive, but at level coho salmon in the Delta, just so you know. So contaminants have been brought up many times as a potential source of the pod or pelagic organism decline, the declines in fish that we're seeing. And so this particular study just decided to get in there and see, do we even have 66 ppdq in the Delta, and where is it and when is it? And so this is a paper that was put out by the U.S. Geological Survey's California Water Science Center that has an organic chemistry lab. And one thing that they do is they archive samples. They do a big collections of water around the Delta, under normal conditions and under high flow conditions to look at storm runoff effects. And so they have a big archive, and they went in there and pulled out 2018 to 2024 samples, in particularly looking at stormwater runoff sites. And what they found is that about a third of the samples that they measured across the whole system did have measurable 6 ppdq. Again, it's a byproduct of tires being about 1 to 2% ppd. And then of that, you get this byproduct of this quinone that comes off. I'm not going to read the full long name for this. It's just enormous. But 6 ppdq is what we call it. So the big hits were in Stockton. That was the highest concentration that was found at 21 nanograms per liter. And then there was another one near Vacaville. But if you go back in time, even to 2018, there were some samples that had measurable concentrations. One of the big questions they have is the preservation of the 6 ppdq in these samples. So the fact that there was any measurements at all in these archived samples is quite a statement. So their argument is that in the future, we should be collecting specifically for this and analyzing it more quickly rather than relying on preservation and then some future analysis, because it has a fairly short half-life. It turns over quickly. So I will just say that there's a lot of research on this elsewhere, but it's something that if you think about the the ports, the airports, the traffic, road traffic that we have around here in the Delta, and in the watersheds, even going up to, Sacramento, to Shasta. This is a relatively understudied contaminant that is known to have lethal effects on some species, and obviously quite a few sublethal effects, just behavioral and things like that, blinding or affecting the livelihood of fish in the water. So that's all I have for this paper.
Can we ask you some questions?
Oh, of course.
Okay, Member Burgess.
Good. So in my previous work, I worked in a watershed and did water sampling and storm drain education. And as you were talking, I was thinking about the fact that in California, we have a lot of storm drains that drain into the watersheds, which drain into the Delta. And we don't have constant rain events. And so what happens is a lot of this buildup, whether it's this new chemical that's coming off tires or others, they kind of settle down into the storm drains before they go down into the creeks or the Delta. And so this concentration builds up. It gets really toxic. And then we get a rain event and then we'll see a fish kill or we'll see, those damages. And so it's not only you said 43,000 tires?
Yeah.
Which is like
And
crazy.
I have to credit Jackie Lang at UC Davis, who they estimated that using San Francisco Estuary Institute's data set. So it was kind of an eye-opening.
Yeah. But the thing is that, in other places, the amount of that gets diluted because there's rain events constantly, and that's not a great thing either. But it's even more toxic because there is a buildup and then there's kind of this flushing that happens. And the other part of my comment is we're still learning what we need to look for. And so there's things that are happening that we, haven't even identified. And we see that like even in water treatment, they didn't know to take out, to filter out medications or PFAS or, all these different things. And so we don't know what we don't know. And so it's just kind of interesting. We just realized another thing that we didn't know.
Any other? I had a question. You said that it has a relatively short half-life. So are you saying that it actually goes away, or that it's not measured? It's not able to be measured anymore in that area?
Probably both. So it's
Okay.
degrading, but on that question, what I say short half-life, it's not like seconds or something, it's years, but that's why you don't see a buildup of it per se in sediments. And so I don't know I don't know the answer of what it turns into, because all of these organic chemicals just oxidize into something else and then goes on. And so maybe there's, another derivative. I'm sure Inga, she's shaking her head, but yeah, we don't really know the next phase. But we do know this particular byproduct is lethal in some, environmentally relevant concentrations.
Got it. Thank you.
Oh, yes. So let me keep going. Yep, no more questions on that. So let's go on to some of our activities. I'll just launch into where things that we've been doing since the last council meeting in April. Then following week, we had the early career leadership workshop for those 6 Delta Science Fellows that was brought up by Jessica. And one of the things they did in particular, I'm going to highlight because I hope that you listen to it, is they practiced 3-minute pitches on their work. So coming up with, how do you convey your work in a very short way?
I am. Thank you.
See him. All right. Thanks for everyone's patience. Sorry, we had a technical issue with our internet connection, so we wanted to make sure we could stay online for folks that are watching that way. So I think Dr. Lisa Marie Wyndham Myers was in the middle of her report, and we're going to have her wrap up quickly so we can move on to our agenda item 8. So I'll turn it back over to Lisa Marie.
Great. Thank you, Chair Lee. So some other quick activities in May. Again, we sent 5 of our Sea Grant State Fellows on the Bay Delta Water Tour. Again, a must do, I would suggest. The Microplastic Symposium at UC Davis was also later that week. Again, the recording for that is online. It's available, a link through our council YouTube page as well. So I would suggest looking at or watching some of those talks because it was truly incredible. California Water and Environmental Modeling Forum, QEMF, was last week. I had a presentation. It was also a great opportunity to hear from modelers across agencies, NGOs, private consulting firms, and so on. It's just the status of where we are in being able to model water fluxes and the impact of those water fluxes. And then my talk at QEMF was on open science, very similar to what Jessica Pearson was describing earlier, and particularly collaborative and anticipatory science to be ahead of curveballs. And so speaking of curveballs, the golden mussels response on your radar. Right now, we're working on containment. There was actually a presentation by California Department of Fish and Wildlife at the last Independent Science Board meeting, which again, you can watch the recording if you want. There's money available to help reduce, basically to improve the facilities to reduce transport out of the Delta into other waterways, because we're working on containment now as the primary goal. And then I will also call out, because I didn't get a chance, the Delta Synthesis Working Group. We're having it right now. Our call, this is our flagship NCEAS partnership, the National Center for Ecological Analysis and Synthesis. This is our third effort. We're looking for the next cohort of scientists to join, and we're looking for ideas. So again, if somebody has an idea of a synthesis project that they think there's data available and we will have agency and management relevance, please consider submitting through the links that are within the packet to share your ideas on what we should do moving forward. And then the last thing on your radar is State of the Estuary Conference. It's coming up in October. Again, this is our partner group. We partially fund the State of the Estuary meeting. It's every other year with the Bay Delta Science Conference. And right now they're accepting abstracts for presentations or posters or even art submissions for basically by June 13th. So, and there's a link online that you can find here again in your packet if you are interested in attending and contributing to that. Again, very important for us to bring those kind of collaborative groups together. And that's it for the updates. And I think we have a graphic for by the numbers, and this is going to be actually pretty quick. Some good news and bad news for the graphics on here. I think you can see right off the bat the northern reservoirs, the federal and state reservoirs, Shasta and Oroville, are very high. Oroville is actually at capacity. It is literally, at full capacity. And so that's in contrast to the San Luis Reservoir, which is actually less than even average at this point in time. So the north is seeing high water supplies. That's true also for the last month of precipitation, whereas the Central Sierra is lower than average in terms of rainfall. Temperatures seem fine in keeping with average concentrations. Again, at Clear Creek up near the Shasta outfall, Collinsville, where the confluence is between the San Joaquin and the Sacramento rivers, and then Clifton Court Forebay, where we divert exports south. And then I will bring up the only critical thing that's looking not so good is the San Joaquin River flows are at 1/3 of what they would normally be flowing at this time. All of the Sacramento River, the San Joaquin River, and our diverted exports are all fresh. Everything's, the salinity is not a problem there, but the flows are less than would be expected on the San Joaquin River, and our exports are lower now than would be expected at this time of year. So that is the by the numbers update.
Thank you. Thanks for rushing through that. I appreciate it. Keep us on track with our time. Members, do we have any questions for Dr. Wyndham Myers? Nope. Okay.
Very informative report, as always.
Very, yes. One of our favorite parts of our meeting. Emma, do we have any public comment on this item?
No, Madam Chair, not in Sacramento. It's in Gali.
None here. Thank you.
No public comment.
All right. Thank you. And now we'd like to welcome up our Delta ISB Chair, Dr. Inga Werner, and Delta ISB member, Dr. Bob Nyman, who are going to provide us with an update on the Delta ISB's current activities, including a presentation on the recently completed Food Webs review. So thank you for being here both. We appreciate it. Nice to see you.
Thanks very much. Good morning, Chair Lee. Good morning, council members. We're glad to be here. I will give a very brief update so that Dr. Bob Nyman has time for his update on or his summary of the recommendations and conclusions of the Food Webs review. So, all right, this is up.
You may need to speak a little closer to the microphone.
It's too low. All right. So is this good? All right. Thank you. Who we are, you have seen this before. We are 10 scientists with different types of expertise from all across the United States, varying from economics to ecology. We have at the moment one vacancy due to the resignation of Dr. Holzer in January of this year. We have 5 members who are concluding their term on August 31st of this year. And these members can serve another term if reappointed by the council. The Delta lead scientist will be presenting a recommendation to the council in the coming months regarding appointments and reappointments. Is that me? So what we do, most of you know this, the board was founded based on the Delta Reform Act in 2009, provides oversight of the scientific research, monitoring, and assessment programs that support adaptive management in the Delta, and provides independent advice on the Delta plan, but also other documents from regulatory agencies upon request. Here's a list of 11 thematic reviews that the board has done so far. I'm not going to go through these. You have the list in your handouts. And just want to point to the latest one that has been concluded, the Food Webs review in 2024, and Dr. Nyman will speak to that later after me. Very briefly, our current work focuses on completing 2 other thematic reviews, one on subsidence and one on decision-making under deep uncertainty. And you have little summaries in one of your handout on these. New activities are, and I spoke to you about this before, are the contaminants monitoring review. We are in the process of, we have received public comments on the prospectus for this review. They have been interesting and deep and detailed, and I can speak to that more if you like. We are also preparing a climate science symposium in September. We plan to host a symposium at UC Davis. It will explore current climate projections and uncertainties in the Delta region and how organizations in the Delta are incorporating the current knowledge of climate change into their decision-making. Lastly, we are conducting outreach and communication of our completed reviews. We are in the process of turning the 2022 Monitoring Enterprise Review into a manuscript to be submitted to the journal Ecological Indicators. This will hopefully help reach a broader audience. And we're coming to the Food Webs review, which was recently completed. And I will now turn it over to Dr. Bob Nyman, who will share the findings and recommendations.
Great, thank you, Inga. Madam Chair, council members, thank you so much for the opportunity to make a presentation today. in talking about the food web review, it should really be noted that Steve Brandt, who was former chair of the ISB, was instrumental in getting this off the ground. And Lillian McCormick, who was a postdoctoral fellow with us for a year or so, really helped a lot, and very good. Really helped us a lot in getting this off the ground. So I have a presentation today. I'll try to make it brief and to the point. Go next slide. First of all, what are food webs and why are they important? It's, I think, incredibly important to understand this is that food webs really are a network of organisms in the Delta that are linked by their feeding relationships. Next. And if the food webs are, why they're important is that they regulate the flow of energy, nutrients, contaminants through the ecosystem. And this is accomplished really by interactions among the species that we find in the Delta, for example, predation that occurs, as well as by interactions of the species with the environment at the time. And one way to think about this is that we know a lot about what's out in the Delta. We can put together that structure. Food webs really reveal the physiology of the system in the sense that it tells us a lot about how the system is working, how it's functioning. And you may think about it when you go to the doctor and you have your blood pressure taken or you have a blood test, something like that. That's telling you a lot about your health, about how you're doing. Everyone knows what you are by looking at you. But food webs are like, in a way, like going to the doctor in the sense that we're starting to understand better how they're actually functioning behind the scenes and whether or not they're being productive, whether they're supporting the carrying capacity or the abundance of organisms that are out there. Are they contributing to the resilience of the system, the ability of the ecosystem to bounce back once it's disturbed, or how they might be influencing the overall productivity of the system. So it's really taking a very different perspective towards looking at how the Delta as an ecological system is really working. The next slide. So in our review, we really had two objectives here. The first was to assess about how to better incorporate or use and advance food web knowledge for managing the Delta's aquatic ecosystem. And second was to identify what tools are available or should be developed in the near future to help us understand what's going on with food webs. Now, in terms of the report, we considered the full food web of the Delta, or at least we tried to do so, with a focus on upper trophic levels. Well, what does that mean? And these are terms, a couple terms I'll use here in the next few minutes. Upper trophic levels are going to be your top consumers. They're going like the Chinook salmon you see on the right, the picture there, is that they're providing what we call a top-down control on what's happening in the Delta through predation, what they eat, and so forth. And this is opposed to what I'll get to in a minute, what we call bottom-up controls, which is what's largely been looked at in the past. These are where the kind of more traditional, where you get production by microscopic algae, and the algae are being eaten by copepods or other little creatures, and then the little creatures are being eaten by the bigger fish and so on. So that's bottom-up control from the basis of the system, as opposed to taking a viewpoint of looking down, looking at the top predators and how they're actually imposing their will on the structure and the physiology of the Delta itself. And very few people have ever looked at that or considered it as an important driver, when in fact it is a very important driver within the system. So next slide. So the review, let's see, next slide. The review and the report are based upon an evaluation of the existing literature, and we literally compiled hundreds and hundreds of papers that had been published, both in the professional literature or reviewed literature, as well as in what we would call the gray literature, kind of unpublished or not peer reviewed. We had extensive discussions with the full spectrum of the Delta community, not only agency scientists, but managers, nonprofits, and so forth, academics. We held a 2-day workshop that had over 100 participants. And then we received lots and lots of public comments, both beforehand as well as during the workshop, and then afterwards on the report itself. And all of these have been, all of this input has been put in to the report that you see before you today, the Food Web report. Next slide. So what did we discover? Well, the short answer is we discovered lots of things, and lots of things that we couldn't anticipate beforehand. So I can't go into all of them today, but let's just focus for a second on modeling in the Delta as one example of what we did discover. Well, we found out that several food web models had already been developed for the Bay Delta. Next slide. And these focus primarily on bottom-up processes, basically phytoplankton, consumers like copepods and bigger fish and coming from that direction. And we found also, next slide, next one, that many Delta models that made an attempt to represent the entire food web were very limited in their spatial or temporal coverage, over very short periods of time, or they were conceptual in nature. In other words, people were taking what they knew or what they felt they knew about the Delta and putting it together without numbers, but putting kind of arrows and boxes and diagrams and so forth, and trying to come up with a model that way. Now at the workshop, next slide, everyone at the workshop felt that any effective evaluation for management or changes in management or species population really required quantitative modeling, not just conceptual, that the modeling should become more precise. It should have numbers attached to it. It should be something where you could go into the models and you could change the numbers and then look at the possible outputs or the outcomes of these models. And this has been used not only successfully, very, very successfully elsewhere in similar systems like the Great Lakes, the North Atlantic Ocean, the Gulf of Mexico, Chesapeake Bay, and other, I would say, other systems that would be comparable to the Delta. Now, on the right side, what you see up there are some of the models that have already been developed for the Delta. But again, most of these are conceptual and they're also very limited in terms of their time and space horizons. Next slide. Now, what are the benefits of taking a food web approach? We developed tables, actually 5 possible applications as tables for improving natural resource management in the Delta. Now, I'm not going to go through all 5. The other, the one I have before you is for ecosystem-based management, but we also looked at single species management, how you might apply a food web approach to invasive species, how it might support restoration activities and so forth. And we developed these really for the scientists and the science managers in the Delta to help guide them in their thinking as they go forward. And we looked at the important management questions, like in this example, how do changes in environmental conditions affect the interactions we would see in food webs? We tried to identify what benefits they would be derived from this by taking a food web approach. For example, the second bullet there, identifying key ecological species, which are often not the same ones as the ones that are being focused on at the moment. And then we provide the scientists and the managers with some suggested priorities for programs and research activities going forward. Now, if you'd like to learn more about this, I don't have enough time today to go through all of these in any detail, but these are discussed and described in the report itself. And I think you'll find it to make for some interesting reading. We're really trying to guide the science community going forward with this. Next slide. As part of the activity, we also identified a series of major science gaps, and there are 7 of these. And the next slide. I'm going to talk about just quickly about 5 of them today. The first science gap that most, well, actually just about everybody could agree upon is that we needed to quantify the roles of the most abundant fish species. These are not often the fish species that are kind of touted in current activities like Chinook salmon or Delta smelt and so on, but are the species that are really out there in great numbers. Fish like catfish, stickleback, I don't, you could name a whole bunch of others, and they eat a lot of food, and they eat each other as well as just about consume most of the productivity in the Delta. And we know very, very little about them and what their roles might be in keeping the system vibrant over the long term. So that's the first major science gap. The second one has to do with understanding the dynamics of detritus and their associated communities. Now, the term detritus, this is a fun one. It has been known for a long time that detritus, it's really, it was considered to be kind of dead organic matter in the system, that it was vitally important for maintaining the productivity and vitality of ecological systems. Now, what is detritus? Well, you can think about it like the soil in your garden. If you want to have a productive garden and you want to grow the right vegetables and you want to grow them in quantity and so forth, you have good quality soils out there. If you want to grow a cactus or two, you would change the soil. And it's the same way with the Delta. This detritus it's really hard to characterize. It's very complex, and yet we know from a lot of studies that have been done here and elsewhere that it underpins an awful lot of what goes on in the Delta. It's just hard in terms of in a technical sense to really try and describe it in a good way yet. This is one of those areas that I think as we go forward, there's going to be lots of major discoveries about this. And
I feel like detritus needs a rebrand.
it does. It definitely needs a rebrand. But every time we look at it, it comes up aces in terms of really driving what's going on in systems. So anyway, think about it as your aquatic soil, all right, both in the water column and the substrate. Next one. This is one, contaminants. This is one that everybody agreed upon, is understanding the flow and consequences of contaminants. And the Delta ISB does have, you've heard from Dr. Werner, we do have an activity on this going forward. So I won't say any more about that today. The next one. The fourth one is to improve the quality and consistency of food web data for syntheses and for public accessibility. There's a lot of information in the Delta, but it's very fragmented, and trying to get that information in ways that it's usable was kind of it was frustrating and annoying, I think, to a lot of folks. It's a lot out there, but how do we actually bring that in to a logical system which allows us to use that information going forward? And I'm going to come back to this in a minute because I think this is really an urgent thing. And then lastly is my favorite. This handsome fellow here is a tern, a Caspian tern, and he or she is having lunch. And The last science gap really relates to the role of predatory birds and mammals in the system. These are true top-down carnivores, and you often don't see them. They operate at night or at times when we're generally not out there, but they eat lots of food. And it's not only what they eat, it's what they don't eat, what they allow to live going forward. And everywhere that we've looked at this all over the world, it has a profound impact on the structure of ecological systems. And yet in the Delta, it seems to be largely ignored. And I would say that's it's one of our major science gaps going forward. So next slide. Okay, our recommendations and moving forward, coming to the end here. We have 4 recommendations we would like to talk to you about. The first one is the need for developing a comprehensive coordination and implementation plan or activities for collecting, analyzing, and applying food web information going forward. Basically, what we're talking about here is a collaboratory that's focused on food webs, because it requires an interdisciplinary collaboration among agencies, universities, the public, tribes, and so forth. If we had a collaboratory or a collaboratory-like activity, the participants would decide on key management needs and the science questions going forward. And where possible, these activities should be guided by hypotheses and activities that are conducted as testable experiments. Now at the bottom, we put a little diagram down there. This is used very effectively in the Chesapeake Bay for guiding their programs there, where they actually have a collaboratory that, at least to date, seems to be very effective in helping them guide their science and the type of science that should be done. Our second recommendation, next slide. Second recommendation focuses on research and monitoring programs to explore the key aspects of food webs. We would like to see a focus on science gaps and how to connect them to existing knowledge. We would like to see more done in the way of food web data, that it's regularly updated, quality controlled, and made accessible, not only to other scientists, but to the public. And then this last one here, I consider this to be extremely urgent, is to encourage and support ongoing syntheses of existing food web information. And the reason I consider it, and hopefully the rest of the ISB would go along with this, is because we have a lot of kind of age-related retirements occurring among the state agencies. So we have a lot of wisdom and a lot of knowledge in the system. People have been working in the Delta for decades who are retiring now. And once they retire, there's no easy mechanism for them to actually sit down and synthesize what they know. And this has been exacerbated in the last number of months by the changes occurring at the federal level. We're losing some of our top scientists. And I know in my own backyard, which is the University of Washington and NOAA, last week we lost 7 of our top NOAA scientists to early retirements, people who have decades of information and wisdom about how our systems work. And we have no way of now capturing what's in their brains and what they're doing. And we need this desperately right now, at least to see us over the coming years and to educate the upcoming generation of scientists. So that's my urgent plea for that, because data management, information sharing, and synthesis are really the pillars of what we do in a science management enterprise. Our third recommendation has to do with modeling, and this has been done successfully in a lot of other large systems where they use appropriately scaled food web models determined by management questions and key environmental drivers. These incorporate relevant processes and trophic levels to learn relationships among the environmental conditions and species of interest. And there's a lot to learn from what has been going on in these other large ecological systems. And we can learn from the processes and I would say the positive aspects of the processes that they've gone through, as well as from the mistakes that they've made. We're, I think, well poised to be able to move ahead on this. And then finally, for recommendations, and I won't belabor this, we felt it important to remind everybody that this has to be done in an adaptive framework and over a long period of time. So the take-home messages from the report are these. There's 3 of them. We feel that advancing food web science in the Delta will serve a broad range of management applications. For example, we have a lot of restoration planned for the coming decade, literally tens of thousands of acres that are to go into restoration activities. Food web approach tells us whether or not those restoration activities are successful in terms of producing the food to support the fish species that we are restoring the systems for. That's just one example, and I can give you many others. But having the food web perspective really helps us understand whether or not these actions in the Delta are actually doing what they're intended to do. The second take-home message has to do with improving our ability to forecast the effects of management actions and climate change on fish and other aquatic species. If we have the quantitative models, that allows us to change the numbers in those models, to literally be more forward-looking to see what the consequences are of management decisions and climate change, at least give us some inkling and insights into what might happen if things change. So the quantitative models become important. And then finally, the collaboration and adaptive management will increase the effectiveness and efficiency. And this really comes down to the collaboratory. We need people across all these groups, both agencies, academics, federal groups, nonprofit sector, and so on. In the Delta and in this region, there's just an unbelievable wealth of people and good minds here, probably better than any place in the world. But we're not harnessing them effectively yet. And we could do so much better, especially if we had a collaboratory and a focus that was a lot more forward-looking. So next slide. Okay, so these recommendations are ambitious. They're highly ambitious, and they'll take time to be developed. We're not going to be able to do this next year or probably in the next 5 years, but we're really thinking about this as a 10-year program, maybe even beyond. It's really trying to change the way folks are thinking about the Delta. But on a positive note, the Interagency Ecological Program is already proposing a food web synthesis, and on the right side of the diagram here is the part of the abstract from their proposal to do so. And we've been giving a number of presentations at, for example, the IEP workshop, the Bay Delta Science Conference, and so on. And judging from the reactions of folks and the kinds of questions we're getting, all have been very well received, that people are beginning to change their thinking a little bit towards food webs. And then, of course, we're always looking for other ways to implement the recommendations. And hopefully the collaboratory or something along those lines will kind of reveal itself in the coming year or two, and we can begin to put this perspective on the ground. So with that, I thank you. I probably have generated a whole bunch of questions in your mind. If you have them now or later, just let us know. Or if you want, I don't know if the report's in your packet or not, but there are some extra copies around. So thank you so much.
Excellent, excellent presentation. Thank you. Ingo, was there anything else that you wanted to, as wrapping it up? No. Okay. Okay, thank you. Thank you. Well, I'll ask our members if there's any questions. Yes, Member Moranian.
I have 2 questions. One was when you talked about the top-down approach, and you said that's not as good as the bottom-up approach.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean
web.
to mean that one was better than the other. It's just that traditionally a bottom-up approach has been used in food web studies. That's kind of our history of in science. But only in the last a decade or so, or a little bit more, people have started to look at the role of top-down controls of predation of birds, mammals by other fish and so forth. And they've been very surprised at how strong those top-down influences can be on controlling not only kind of the physiology of the system or the dynamics of the system, but also structuring the kinds of communities that are there.
Sure.
So we're beginning to discover more about the
I see,
top-down,
I see.
but traditionally our teachings and so on have been from a bottom-up.
Sure. And I have two more. One is the role of the non-native species on this analysis that you have, if you could shed light on it. Would be doing better if we didn't have the non-native species there? Is that a major challenge or?
That's a hard one to answer because it's in a way it's a value judgment. Is it better or worse? It's different. And this may open a real can of worms for the council. I know it does within the ISB, is that, we discuss among ourselves a lot the idea of a novel ecosystem, that the Delta is really, it's something different now than it was in the past and will be different going into the future. And I don't know whether that's good or bad. I just know that it's different.
But it makes it worse. That's what I'm trying to see, or maybe not.
I
don't
honestly,
know?
I don't know if it's due to the species or whether it's due to all the environmental changes that have occurred within the Delta's watershed.
Sure.
With all the people coming in with contaminants, with the changes of flows, with changes in temperature, those also exert very strong controls.
My last question is, do you find this water body and this analysis and this work that you did more challenging than any other that you have worked on?
In my personal, yes. And it's because it's a highly altered system. And also you have the human component here, and and the economics. Personally, most of my work over the years has been in Alaska and coastal British Columbia and Africa, South America, places like that, where I've been working on largely ecological systems that are not so impacted by human development. And I did that purposely because I wanted to understand the basics of how rivers work as ecological systems. And then all of a sudden I'm here as an advisor, but this whole human component it's overwhelming on many days. So
thank you.
Okay, welcome.
Fascinating. Yes, Member Hueso.
Thank you. And I want to expand a little bit on what Councilmember Morani brought up in that gathering data, studying, doing analysis, increases our understanding of what's happening in the environment. But at what point does that trigger a response or direction to people in government or in the community to take action to try to control what's happening in an environment that's part of a greater worldwide environment? One of the things I observe in the river, I've heard, as we've discussed, how human intervention and interaction has caused a decline in certain species. We've talked about and learned about Delta smelt over the last few decades. And I also learned that there are invasive species like the striper that has moved in to feed on not only the salmon, but the smelt. And now we're seeing more often and in greater quantities, sea lions are coming in from very far away to feed. And it just seems to me that when you have a system that's highly impacted and there are certain species that are highly impacted, that introducing invasive species could really cause additional harm Yet I haven't really seen or heard anybody respond to the invasive species, whether they're gonna try to limit them or just allow nature to take its regular course. And what does that mean we know that species have gone endangered over the millennia, but are we gonna let that happen? And if this data is informative, at what point do we start to act on it? And how can that be part of this process?
Mhm. That's that comes back, I think, to societal values. It's not a science question per se, but it has to do with what society wants, what's acceptable to them. And I agree with you. The invasive species can cause a lot of changes, changes that we may or may not like. But in the end, the biology is going to prevail. It'll do what it wants to do. You know, I cannot think of a good example to give you where an invasive species has ever been eradicated. We can do certain things, usually at tremendous cost, to try and control them in certain areas, but we can never, once they're in the system, we can't eradicate them. And so it ends up, from a science perspective, and this is where personally where I come from, I'm not speaking about the ISB right now, is that rather than try to say something is good or bad, I think we really need to accept the idea that we have an evolving novel ecosystem in the Delta. It is what it is. There are certain things that we might be able to control or manipulate, but for the most part, it's got its own mind. It's going where it wants to go. And from the species and the things that we're doing within the watersheds. You know, we can tweak it, but we can't really fundamentally change it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes.
Bell, right?
Ring the bell. Yes.
Ring the bell at some point.
Well,
as the scientists that we listen to.
I think we do that all the time, and we do it with a little, probably too much hysteria at the time, but
Yes.
maybe we should do it more often. I don't know.
Member Burgess and then Member Miller.
Thank you. Yeah, I thought it was interesting that you showed this picture from 1557 because you know this makes sense. This is kind of the basis. But as you were talking about it, I was thinking about youth and early adoption of how to look at science in a certain way. And it is basic, but it's also a really great tool for all of us to kind of look at. I was thinking about computers and AI and all of that, and how when folks are exposed to that, when youth are exposed to these ideas, it helps them, think in a bigger way. And so I think it's a really great program, and I hope to see it brought back beyond some of this, you know, the other types of technology that, you know, the tools that people use. I really hope that this helps people kind of get back down on the ground or in the water to look and see what's going on. I heard you emphasize that this is adaptive. And I think that kind of goes back to kind of the questions of my colleagues related to, well, invasive species, or how do we do this? And we have climate change, which will impact things. We have HABs, the harmful algae blooms that could impact the food web, golden mussels, an invasive species, the understanding of emerging chemicals that are coming into, you know, these things. And so when I used to work on the ground managing a little watershed, we'd go out and do the benthic macroinvertebrate sampling, which is basically going into the dirt and seeing what kind of bugs we found. And that was a small kind of piece of what you're talking about. And it's, like you said, taking the blood pressure or doing a blood sample. It's a moment in time, that tells us where we're at.
Mhm.
And, when we talk about restoration or we talk about how we judge the data that we're receiving, you said it is what it is, but it's also an opportunity for us to not ignore what things are changing. It's to know what it is. And when we have all these different goals and values, it allows us to be the best we can in this part of the toolbox. So I really appreciate it, and I appreciate your presentation.
Oh, thank you. I couldn't agree with you more, especially about the younger people. In the Seattle schools, we did this for many years, especially with salmon and rivers. And honestly, I would go and I would lecture to, or give a talk, I shouldn't say lecture, but I would go and give a presentation at the schools. And I got better questions from those 11 and 12-year-olds than I was getting from my graduate students.
Yeah.
It was
And the other thing is when we're in a time when people are challenging science, this is not complicated. This is easy to understand, which I think helps create a pathway into more trust of our science. So I think this is great.
Thank you.
Gil?
Thank you. I agree. This is fantastic. Just in terms of the folks retiring and losing these huge bodies of knowledge, in terms of what we can do, I understand a lot of it is some of the federal funding being removed. Is there anything that we're able to do in terms of oral histories or recording folks or creating almost like a secondary ISB? I want to be really aware in this moment of crisis that we're able to maybe adapt and bring people under a tent so that we don't lose their knowledge. I mean, thank God they're here. Like, how can we continue to collaborate with these incredible scientists?
Well, number one, I think your idea of oral history, somebody who can capture that, that's very valuable. As part of this process, I would ask the question among the senior scientists in the Delta, about syntheses. And I asked them if they had a means to do this. And to a person, they said no, that their jobs required them to, I would say, manage the scientists in their group going forward. They had to collect data. There was no provision for them having a year or 18 months or whatever to, as they ended their career, to sit and write down what they knew. They had no opportunity whatsoever for that, at least in terms of what they could identify. And it seems to me that at the end of somebody's career, you need that opportunity. And it seems to me that's something that the Delta could do is be able to offer, whether it's scholarships or a post or something, within the Delta community to come and synthesize for a year or two and show that kind of leadership within the broader community. And who better to do it than the people who have been on the ground there for 20, 25 years or longer.
Yeah,
So.
absolutely. Is that something we could consider at a future date?
I think something that's really unique about the Delta Science program is it's literally part of our mission to do synthesis. So we have an entire unit in our Delta Science program that looks for opportunities to promote synthesis. In terms of specific oral histories, I think that's something that we'd have to follow up on. But this is something we spend quite a bit of our time and effort trying to move forward. It'd be nice to have an unlimited pot of money to do that. But I think there are some of those opportunities even at the IEP workshop and at the Bay Delta Science Conference to invite some of those individuals to present on their findings from their career. So I think that's one way we could move forward.
Yeah, I think maybe just a little bit of creativity. I mean, I understand the money problem, but I would just say two things for people that are incredibly forthright and have spent their whole careers doing this. One, if we could increase our opportunity for publication around these issues, and without a post, without a fellowship, just to see if we can at least have it be part of our library of information. I do think that allows their work to live on. Two is literally a portal that they could put some of the data into, and to Ms. Wyndham Myers, like how we ensure that becomes part of our open source. And then 3, I would say, like in this moment of crisis where we're losing so many scientists, whether or not we pivot and adapt, and this is obviously a longer meeting or a different topic, but it just seems to me like we're in a world in which the answer cannot always be money. I don't mean to sound naive, but I do think this is not the only motivation of scientists, obviously. So I just think if we can come up with creative ways to get this information in and have it be available to the public and use it as an example of kind of how science serves a greater good. So maybe we can think through that.
I agree. Thank you. That's
Well, this may also be maybe an opportunity for the NC's efforts.
Yeah, I was just thinking that our focus is on young scientists and, developing their skills for data interpretation, visualization, communication, things like that. But somehow incorporating those retirees that still in some sort of emeritus setting want to contribute. It's a great idea. I don't know how to do it right now, but because the NC's workshop is coming up, that would be a nice thing to incorporate. I think we can talk to the NC's organizing team and see how to pull that off.
That's actually a good suggestion. I was an NC's fellow for a year where they gave me a fellowship. And I ended up writing a textbook on riparian zones along rivers and used it in my classes for the next 10 to 15 years. And without that fellowship, I know I would not have done that. But it allowed me a year of being in residence at NC's, to prepare this book. And something like that at that time was just incredibly valuable. I couldn't have done it without it.
Wonderful. I just wanted to mention, I especially liked your slide on the science gaps. And I think that it's these kinds of reports and the valuable advice and recommendations we get from the ISB that help us inform future science funding and projects that we want to see happening in the Delta. And this kind of like concrete information about where our gaps are, I think is really, really valuable to the science program. So I appreciate that. And I also know that Dr. Wyndham Myers has been talking about a collaboratory and doing some work around it. So I think, one thing that we might suggest to our lead scientist is at a future meeting, maybe have incorporate some information about that into one of your upcoming presentations for the members so we can kind of see where you're going with that and what you're thinking. And then definitely love Member Miller's idea about how we can think about ways to help our federal partner scientists who are, going into retirement, how we can capture their knowledge and keep that going forward. It might be something that's now on our radar in a bigger way. So we really appreciate you bringing that to our attention.
Right.
Do any other members have any questions or any more comments? All right, I think we'll go to public comment on this item. Thank you again so much, Dr. Nyman and Dr. Werner, for being here with us today.
Thank you.
Emma, any public comments?
We have no public comment in Sacramento. Councilmember Zingali?
None in Eureka, thank you.
No public comment.
Great, thank you. And we are a little bit behind schedule because of our internet issues. So I want to quickly get our next panel up here, agenda item number 9, Delta Levee Investment Strategy Risk Reduction Analysis. At our last month's meeting, we had the Department of Water Resources come and talk to us about the D-list prioritization. And so now we're going to have Jeff Henderson introduce his team to talk about the results of the risk reduction analysis that they developed. And I'll ask you guys to kind of move quickly through this.
Thank you. And I'm actually going to kick this one off.
Perfect, Jessica.
And
Thank you.
yes, we will keep this as short as possible. I know we were trying to end here before lunch. So really, this is just kind of a quick summary reaction to what we received from the Department of Water Resources in their annually required report on Delta levee spending. So we know that levees in the Delta are referred to as the hardest working levees in America, and that is because they are expected to protect people, property, infrastructure, ecosystems, the water supply for 27 million people, keep all that safe from flooding 24/7, not just during flood events like a typical levee would. And so over 10 years of analytical work, outreach, relationship building, the council in 2023 had completed its Delta Levees investment strategy. And this was a requirement from the legislature that we set priorities for state investments in Delta Levees. And in that D-list, the Delta Levee Investment Strategy, we adopted priorities for each island and track in the Delta based on relative flood risk. And so those regulations require the department to report annually. That's now only happened twice. So we're really just building our library of information to inform what's happening on the ground with risk reduction. You know, is it working? By how much? Are the islands changing where they should be in their ranking? And when would that occur? So in their presentation, DWR reported that they completed one major levee improvement project in 2024, and this was on Bethel Island. That's south of Rio Vista. It's the most densely populated island in the Delta with about 2,000 people. It's also a very popular recreation destination. And one project may not sound like a lot, but it takes a lot of years to get a levee project done in the Delta. So staff are going to briefly speak to the risk reduction achieved by the Bethel Island project and kind of place that in context of all the projects that have been reported on since 2019. And I think what is really clear here, and perhaps unsaid in the DWR report, is that we are woefully underfunded in meeting all of the goals of the Delta Levee investment strategy and to meet existing demand for all the Delta Levee improvements and maintenance that we've identified as necessary. So with that, I'll hand it over to Jeff, Aaron, and Ashok. Thank you.
Thank you. And could we please bring up the PowerPoint and advance to slide 2, please? And it's my privilege to be here again this morning. Good morning, council members. And I would like to welcome Aaron Mullen, our lead engineer, and Ashok Batula, who is a senior water resources engineer in our planning division. So for today's presentation, we are going to be brief, and we'll give just a short bit of D-list background. We'll recapture and summarize what we heard from DWR at the meeting last month regarding the investments that they made. We'll talk about the flood risk reduction analysis, so taking those investments, moving that forward into completed projects, and then talking about what those completed projects result in terms of improvement in flood risk. We'll place the report in context, as Jessica mentioned. We have a brief follow-up on a couple of the council members' questions from the DWR presentation last month, and then a brief conclusion. Next slide, please. So we're just going to summarize quickly the background for D-lists. Comes from both the Delta Reform Act and our own regulations. The Reform Act required us to reduce risks to people, property, and interests in the state by promoting strategic levee investments, and that the council should develop priorities for these investments in levee operations, maintenance, and improvements. And then in 2024, we adopted actually in January 1st of 2024, the D-list regulation took effect. And that is our risk reduction policy 1 in the Delta plan. It establishes priorities for those operations, maintenance, and improvements in response to the statute, requires DWR to submit a report describing those funding decisions and present to the council annually. You heard that presentation last month. And then again, we use that report to monitor and track how the investment changes risk over time. And I'll hand it off to Aaron.
Thank you, Jeff. Next slide. So this slide is just sort of a brief overview of where we are in the process. I think it's important to note that that's what D-list is. It is a process. It begins with setting priorities and then improving the levees and then analyzing that those levee improvements and seeing what changes we've made to the risk in the Delta. And that's what we are here to talk about today. So as Jeff mentioned, you heard last month from DWR on the finished project and also the other projects that are in the pipeline that will come before you in subsequent years. But this time we only have the one project. So next slide, please. Just a really quick recap, as you know, just to remind you of what you heard last month in DWR's report. 21 projects are in construction, so when those are complete, we will hear about them in future reports from DWR. There were 5 newly funded projects. 12 projects were submitted for funding that were not approved, and 1 project was completed. The projects that, in any of the places where there were deviations from the prioritization, DWR did provide justifications in line with our regulation. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Ashok, who's going to talk about our analysis. Next.
All right. Oh, yeah, next slide. Good morning, everyone.
You might want to put your microphone real close to you, or else
Okay.
these folks might run up behind you and scare you.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. Well, thank you for this opportunity. This is Bethel Island. You know, it's located in the Western Delta near Oakley in Contra Costa County. It is. Oh, okay.
I told you.
Okay.
Told you it's gonna happen.
Okay. All right. Thank you. This is Bethel Island. You know, it's located in Western Delta near Oakley in Contra Costa County. It is one of the 8 Western islands important for salinity management and water quality in the Delta. Like JP mentioned, like, you know, it's a very high priority island under DSC category. It's also a legacy community. There is like 11.5 miles of levee protecting the island. It's 2,300 residents, ag lands, critical infrastructure, and ecosystem. I should say of the 11.5 miles of levees, 75% of the levees meet Bulletin 19282 standard, which is the state standard. That's what they're aiming to meet. Next slide, please. Okay, that's the project location. It is located in the Western Delta, the northwest side of the island. And the improvements happen from station 0 to station 130. So that translates to about 2.5 miles. Each station is 100 feet. The total project cost is $9.6 million. The project delivered several key improvements. Basically, it brought that 2.5 mile segment to Bulletin 19282 standard. And also it helped with the seepage management, very important for the levee stability. And also this helped create new habitat on the water side and also on the land side of the levee. Next slide, please. Okay. Like JP mentioned, whenever DWR completes a project, they basically provide as-built information to us, and we use that information to run it through a tool called DST tool, and that's what we did. When we ran the tool, we look for key metrics like expected annual damages, expected annual fatalities, and probability of levee failure reductions. These are the key metrics. What we have seen for Bethel Island is the risk has largely remained unchanged. Next slide, please. As you can see, those are the 5 key metrics, and the percent change, post-project to pre-project is about 1%, actually less than 1%. That's about it to you. Okay, thank you.
Next slide, please. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this slide because I know that we are short on time, but this is just a summary of all of the projects that have been reported to us since we have started this process. Just to build something on what JP said, this actually was the first report that we have gotten from DWR under the new regulation. So we had received 2 prior reports from DWR, but that was before the regulation went into effect. So we're still very early in this process. Okay, next slide. This is just going to touch on it very briefly. We have the council set certain goals that and objectives that they were looking for, certain risk reduction goals that they were looking to achieve in the Delta, and this demonstrates our progress to it. One of the things I would like to point out on this slide is along the x-axis, the endpoint is not 100%, that's only 30%. So I just want you to be mindful of scale when you look at this. So, okay, next slide. I definitely wanted to get to this one to give a little bit more time to it. So there were a few council questions from the last meeting when you were in Clarksburg that we had committed to coming back and following up with you. And this slide is our attempt to do that. So the first question was, why were there some islands that were labeled as not included in the D-list in the D-list report? Really what it comes down to is a nomenclature issue. So the way that DWR names islands is slightly different than the way the D-list names islands. So we basically did a cross check on, where, what we had named an island compared to what DWR names the island. And so that's really what's represented there. The one that's in red, I put that in red because DWR reported that that was not found, but the name is the same for both departments. So I'm not sure why that wasn't found. So
And that's because some are unofficially, they're unofficially named islands or referred to as tract numbers usually, right? So that's part of the challenge.
That's part of the challenge. That actually was not the challenge here. It's just, for whatever reason, a lot of this is just a kind of a colloquial understanding of RD names. So, whereas, in D-list, we would name something North Stockton, DWR calls it Sergeant Barnhart. So, I mean, that's kind of a difference, but we have aligned the islands, and we can reference every island that DWR presented to us with our own, with where it lands on the D-list prioritization. So,
And we were able to determine nothing was missing, and these islands were all identified as either high or very high, with the exception of one in terms of the priorities.
In addition to that, something that we should also work with communication with DWR. This was an accounting of subventions funding, and all islands and subventions are considered a high priority. So the prioritization for subventions isn't applicable for this spending. So that was another opportunity for improvement between the department and the council. So council staff will work on that going forward. The other question was, why was there funding allocated for West Sacramento when it's in the other category? So the answer for that is that the funding was actually allocated well over a decade ago. I think it was allocated back in 2009. So this was not a new funding decision. This was something that was decided a long time ago. And it was decided in conjunction with the Army Corps of Engineers to get West Sacramento to the 200-year level of flood protection. So this was a funding decision that the state made before D-list came along. So that's the place for the discrepancy, and DWR provided that to us. Okay, next slide. Okay, in conclusion, as we stated, D-list is a process, and this is something that you can expect to see on the council calendar every year. Over time, we will build a database of information, and we will get to see how trends change over time. We will provide transparency, and we will be able to monitor how things are happening. We're still really early in that process, so it looks like there's not a lot to see here, but I think this is a really critical mission that has been given to the council, and I just want to thank you and open it up for questions.
Yeah, I agree. This is a critical mission, and I appreciate you bringing the questions that we asked back to us in our public forum, so people who are listening to that can have the answers to that too. So great job. Does anyone have any questions or comments? Yes, Member Burgess.
Thank you. I find it fascinating that we spent $9.6 million and are showing an expected annual damage improvement of only $24,527. Is that because it was only, was it 2.5, 2 point something miles? And say that again?
It was 2.5 miles.
2.5 miles. Is it because it wasn't enough that to improve? Is that a goal that makes sense to them? I'm trying to understand. It seems like a big investment for kind of a small
Right,
benefit.
right. So that gotta do something. Yes, you're right. It's like 2.5 miles out of like 11.5 miles. So it's a small portion. But I think one of the things to look into is our methodology. Our methodology of the DSC decision support group methodology. It only considers levee overtopping failure, but levees can fail in other ways, like
Right.
seepage.
Yeah.
So if the levee is not raised, but instead like you have like fill placed on the like land side or the water side, or you're making the berm like wider for future levee raises, it won't be captured in the tool. So that could be one reason. And they have done a lot of improvements with the like, toe, levee toe, and all of that is not captured in the tool. This is something we gotta improve our methodology, but I would say even with that, I don't think like you would see, I don't know, tenfold improvement. It's still.
What about water supply improvements? Because that is along the corridor and in the area that is important for water supply and water quality. Is that taken into consideration here? So I'll jump in and answer that. One of the, in layman's terms, one of the things that we achieved, or one of the things that we advanced with this project, when I say we, I mean the state, is we did reduce the risk of levee failure at a level below overtopping. So we improved the levee stability. And that is critical for water supply and water reliability. I think it's one of the things that people that aren't working in the Delta tend to forget, is that some of our most catastrophic flood failures have happened when it wasn't a high water event.
Right.
So, Jones Tract in 2004 was a sunny day event. It just failed. It didn't overtop. It just failed.
Yeah.
The Brandon Andrus failure that actually precipitated all of our levee investments back in the 70s, that shut down the pumps for, I think it was approximately 3 months. That was another sunny day failure. It just failed, and it wasn't an overtopping event. So improvements to levee stability, especially on the 8 Western Islands, is almost always bolsters water supply reliability and water quality.
Yeah.
The other thing I think that we should point out, though, that should not be overlooked, is that this was a multi-benefit project.
Mm-hmm.
And within those benefits that is not calculated with a dollar number there was habitat enhancement. So that was something else that we don't currently have metrics for that right now, but that was also funded with this project. In the Delta, for the most part, you're only, at least as far as water side habitat goes, you're only really going to get that on the side of a levee. So, that was something else that was invested in with this project.
Yeah, I recognize that, because when you said it's evaluated based on annual damage, annual fatalities, and probability of levee failure, that's not the end all of all success.
Yes.
This is only what we measured. But I do think when we're doing these report outs, or when DWR is, it's like you said, there's a lot of other benefits. Maybe it's, a levee road was improved, or, whatever it is. I think it's important to our taxpayers, to our residents in those areas. And so that wasn't a judgment on my part. It was just acknowledging that we need to do that. The other thing is, when we did D-lists, did we say this stretch? We just identified levees, right? So we didn't say, oh, go do 2.5 miles. That was what was the scope of that project that DWR took on.
Yes, the way that the D-list methodology is put together is we look at the weakest link. since it really doesn't matter if you improve all of the levees, but you don't improve the weakest link. The weakest link is always where the greatest risk is at. So until all of the island is improved, you still have the weakest link analysis. And so that's just part of the way that that's just part of the way the analysis works.
Yeah. And then just two more things. I know there was a real concern about subvention, and I know we've heard from DWR that they are doing these, they have, but we still don't have like a stable funding source for that. Just raising awareness about that. And then the last question I have is, based on now having this period of time, is there anything that you would do differently or add to this that we could learn from this? Ooh, Jeff gave me that look like, ooh.
Well, when you say this, I guess I would like clarity. What do you mean
D-list,
by
you
what
know, how
would you add to D-list?
Yeah, because you guys were trying to figure out how to do this, earnestly trying to, provide. And so I learn from everything I do.
No, absolutely. Yeah, I think I would say, I would like to reinforce that this was the first report that we've gotten
Yeah, so
under
it's still new.
so we're so early in the process that
Yeah.
I wouldn't say that I have the data to make
Yeah.
that statement now.
Okay. I just
Yeah.
appreciate the hard work. I know you guys really leaned in to try to do this right. So
Yeah, I think that the most critical thing when it comes to this is that the delta is inherently complicated.
no, really?
And I appreciate the opportunity to have these dialogues
Yeah.
around it, because when you're just looking at the numbers, sometimes it's the story gets lost a little bit in those metrics. So I think that the narrative around these projects is always critical. So
Yeah.
thank you for having us.
Thank you, Erin.
Thank you. All right, seeing no other questions from members. I can't see Dan Zingali on my screen anymore.
Councilmember Zingali, are you still with us? He is online.
I am. I don't know what happened to the, oh, there we
There
go.
he is.
That was my
Okay.
fault. Sorry.
No worries, no worries. I just wanted to make sure that if I didn't skip you if you had any questions or comments on this item. All right, so I'll ask them if we have any public comment.
We do. We have an online public comment from Gilbert Cosio. You should be able to speak now.
Oh, good morning, Chair Lee and members of the council. Gilbert Cosio, River Delta Consulting. Just have a couple of brief comments on the presentation. One, risk analysis is extremely technical. You need a lot of data, and even with that, when you do get a lot of data, there's a lot of subjectivity. So, your staff's doing the best they can with the data they have, but hopefully in the future it'll get more refined and be more specific. And then, like Erin said, you're talking about the weakest link. A lot of these projects that are funded by DWR Special Project are required to be multi-benefit, and a lot of times multi-benefit will not always fit in the weakest link area. I mean, we don't have a whole lot of data on a lot of these levees, but generally district engineers have a pretty good feel for where that weakest link is. But if that's not where the habitat's required to make it a multi-benefit project, you aren't going to get it funded by DWR to construct, design and construct. And then finally, these RD names have always kind of been of interest to me, because if an RD has a number, it's got an official number issued by the State Lands Commission, and it has an official name because they're quasi-public agencies, or whatever the right term is, under the water code. So why there's a little bit of dispute, I don't know, but that's something that can be rectified if somebody did the proper research. Typically, a group of landowners or an island or however they're formed will petition to the county and get approval from the County Board of Supervisors, and that would be elevated to the State Lands Commission, who officially gives them the stamp of approval and issues the number. RD2, which was interesting that was the one that Erin showed. That's, number 2. It's one of the oldest reclamation districts out there. I used to work for RD3, Grand Island. I know that was 1862, and that one was formed. So RD2 had to be in that same general time frame. So that's, I have one more question, I guess, not really a comment, but to Erin and the panel, have you looked at what the total risk reduction would be if all these islands got up to bulletin 19282, which is kind of the plan. Everybody did a 5-year plan over the last few years, and I think the number came up $1.5 billion to get there. Do you have any idea what as far as your model's concerned, what the risk reduction would be? And that's all I have for now. Thank you.
Hi, Gil. Thank you for your comments and for the question. No, we have not done that kind of analysis, but it can be done. This is something I can get back to you. And you're right, it's DWR from Reclamation District 5-year reports from 2018. They estimated it would take up to $1.1 billion to bring all the levees in the Delta to Bulletin 19282 standards. Thank you. Anything to add?
Okay. Thanks for your comment, Mr. Cosio. Emma, any other comments on this item?
No further comment in Sacramento. Councilmember Zingali?
None here, thank you.
No further comment.
Okay. Our last agenda item is our preparation for the next council meeting, which is going to take place on June 26th back here at the CNRA building. So please refer to our posted meeting notice for further information or updates on that. And thank you all very much. That concludes our meeting.